Welcome back to the Erin Cruz Show. We have on with us right now Andrew Grant. He is running for congressional seat in the California District 7. I want to tell you a little bit about Andrew. He's a strong candidate. But more importantly, I want to kind of get to the meat and potatoes, something I like to talk about a lot. He's born and raised in California. This is important for many, many Californians across the state. We want to know that people love California. They want to stay in California. We have a lot of problems that need solved. Bigger than that, he's a family man. He's been married, happily married, and he has 3 wonderful children. And how do I know that? Because I can look at his website. I can see the light in their eyes. I take a look at all the candidates. I've heard many great things about Andrew. Really, that's so important because that's one of the things that we've really missed out on here in terms of the way people look at politics and some of the issues. Family is where it's at. We've had a complete erosion of the family unit by the media, by, you name it. We have to get back to the basics. Furthermore, I'd like to mention he is a business leader. He's also a former intelligence officer, which is something that's also invaluable. I mean, when he goes there to D.C. and does the good hard work for you and me, he's equipped. He's got the knowledge base to be able to do the job. He served in combat as a Marine, a senior official in the U.S. State Department for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As CEO of the Northern California World Trade Center, he helped regional businesses expand, we like expansions, expand their international trade opportunities, creating good paying jobs. Actually, it says, I'm quoting from his website, I want to be accurate, it says creating more good paying jobs for Californians. His expertise and experience, understanding of the challenges facing us at home and abroad makes him the right person to fight for us in Congress. And I will have to agree with that. Absolutely 100%. Welcome to the Erin Cruz Show, Andrew. We are so honored to have you here with us speaking and sharing about your run for United States Congress.
Thank you, Erin. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you sharing all that, and it's great that you started with family because that's really where it starts.
It is. You go ahead. I interrupted.
Well, I started here in California as a member of a large family. There were 3 kids, and I always say this because it's so important. A strong mom, a very strong mom that kept us together while my dad was working every day. And we always also had dinner together every evening. It didn't matter what time. And so we've carried on some of those traditions here, despite all the challenges and the schedules and things that are impacted by having 3 kids. It doesn't matter if it's 9 o'clock at night. We will have dinner together as a family and make sure that that is part of our daily life. So I appreciate you starting with family. Very important.
Oh, of course. Because I think when you get down to it, you could be very well educated. You could have a great career. You could have done many, many wonderful things. But if that component is missing, if those family values, those things that have made this country so great, so strong, if that's not there, I mean, look what we have around us right now, a fundamental breakdown. The very fabric of our country is being just, broken apart, and we can't have that. So yes, we'd like to get back to the basics. So now, tell me, what made you? We've seen your background. They can go read more about your comprehensive, work. But what made you get to the point where you said, "I want to run for office"?
So I don't know if it was any one single day. I'd say it all kind of came together in 2016. 2016 was an incredibly difficult election year for everyone, really for the nation. We are torn apart. We're still torn apart in many respects by not just what happened then, but what has been happening in the unwinding and politics involvement within that. And look, I came to the conclusion that the best way for me to serve my country again was to go and do this. It's always been about service for me. A lot of people have asked me, you were in the Marine Corps, you were in the intelligence community, you were in the Department of State, Homeland Security.
Right.
And wow, those are all careers. You could have just kept those as careers. And my response has always been, well, those were points of public service. And I left that to go start a business, to work for other businesses in our community. That was my side, my contribution. And when I started to see what happened in 2016 and realized what was so much at risk, and a lot of that has to do with what government tries to do to us and take from our rights and freedoms here in the United States, I felt like it was necessary for me to represent a lot of people that I felt were being passed up in the process, that Washington wasn't caring for what their lives were. And so, when I look at challenges across the United States, people who have lost a job, who haven't made the transition to new economies, I don't look at them and say, well, they're no longer part of our future. I look at them and say, can I go serve them in Washington to make sure they are a part of our future and we can find something for them? Because so that was really a culmination of why I did this.
Right, for the people. For
the people.
For the opportunity to serve and put your skill sets to work. That's wonderful. I mean, you're running for District 7. But the fact of the matter is this. You're running for the United States House of Representatives. What you do, your decisions, all of them, they impact me. I'm here in California. And they, in fact, impact other people across the nation. And it's so important to get to know you, to know what you believe, and to get involved in your campaign because, I always say it takes time, talent, and treasure. And my guess is you need a lot of that. You're running against an incumbent, correct?
Yep, I am.
And that's a lot of money, a lot of power and influence. And what is it that you see that the constituents are missing there, that you can do better for them, that the current incumbent isn't doing to represent them?
Sure. So living in California, you know that we face an incredible amount of cost and burden to keep our business running. In fact, this is the one state that you have to actually pay the government to be able to start a business. Why would you discourage people to start a business? That's strange to me. And I've paid those costs. And so when I look at where I see opportunity simply passing up people in California, I then looked to my representative and I said, who's fighting for me back in Washington, D.C. to make sure there's not too much burden coming from Washington, to make sure there's someone who is part of the team really that fights for things here? What role does this person have? And I looked very closely, as you might expect, given my background, what this person was and wasn't doing. But the fact is he's not passed a single piece of legislation in his entire 3 terms. He doesn't show
amazing.
Up. Yeah, he doesn't show up when there's requirements of accountability, which is to say, here's how I voted and here's why I voted. So a lot of people ask me, what's your platform? What will be the points of priority for you in terms of policy? Sure, I have very important policy points that I'd like to be able to push. But at the end of the day, as you described, it's a lot about the principles and who you are. And for me, it's also having the courage to be back there and to represent what you're doing for your community. And if you're not, to be transparent about that record. And for me, it's almost like chasing someone who doesn't share what that is. And I felt like that lack of accountability is one of the staples why I think people will appreciate me back there. Even if if I do things they disagree with, they'll appreciate that I'm accountable to them. And it's one of my guiding principles, and it always has been for all the work I've done in public service.
Right.
And that's missing right now for the people of this community.
Right, and it's such a shame. It's such a shame. I was speaking with somebody else I interviewed for the show, and we're talking about yes votes, no votes, and people voting present, pretty much. And, but why? Why did you vote yes, or why did you vote no? In fact, why did you vote present? There could be, we've seen it with Rand Paul. We've seen it with other individuals. There might be a really smart reason why you would or wouldn't vote for certain legislation. This legislation that they vote on, it just sounds very easy, but, oh, he voted yes or he voted no. It's not about that. There's a lot to a lot of components to these pieces of legislation, and you have to be smart about it, and you have to serve your constituents. And that's part of what's missing is the explanation to the constituents as to why you did or you didn't vote for this piece of legislation. And if you, voted present, that's, or you abstained, that's fine. But explain yourself and communicate. And that's something that is missing from a lot of progressive left politicians. They use political grandstanding. Now, where do you stand in that? You come off as a very pragmatic individual. very even keel, somebody who will just communicate information. I mean, can we expect a lot of grandstanding from you or information?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because people are shocked when I answer my own phone. I answer the campaign phone, not someone else. Or it's me on Facebook when there's a question posed.
Right.
And sometimes I even say I'm not really sure. And in fact, when you do that with people, because people are informed. Look, one of the things I'm always asked is, why are you Republican? And my response is, I actually trust Americans. I trust people. They're busy. They shouldn't be spending all of their time and lives focused on what happens in Washington. They have jobs, they have families, they have responsibilities. So they should have someone back there who, if they don't know something, can ask those questions and be informed,
right,
often by constituents. I have no problem with saying I don't know everything going into this position in November if I'm elected. But at the same time, absolutely, you have to be someone that's willing to share what those votes are. I will tell you that, as an example, Ami Bera voted for the defense authorization at one point. And then you heard about that, right? You heard it through his Twitter account and his social media and everything. And then he voted against appropriations, which was just a short time later. But you didn't hear that part, because the first part sounds like he supports our military. The second part doesn't sound like he does. But more importantly, he didn't go to make an amendment in the appropriation process that said, here's why I disagree, and with this amendment, here's why I would support it. So I know that sounds very Washington-esque, but the fact is, if you're going out there and saying you support our military, but you don't give them the money to do the job, then you really don't. And that's the part that people are missing, and that's the lack of accountability that frustrates me so much with him.
And part of it also is to the media. Because if he made it a push to let the media know, I mean, they could choose not to inform the public. They don't have to put out his press information. They don't have to interview him. But if he chose to do something, which many individuals like yourself are doing, reach out on social media to inform the constituents by letting them know what action you're taking or what action you're not taking, that's a big piece to that puzzle where you can connect and you can get the messaging through. And I think that's important. And it sounds like, since you're answering your own Facebook, at least at this point, that you're doing that. You're already, even though it's not on actual legislation, you're already using that as a tool to communicate, which is vital.
Well, you build a relationship with your constituents in the campaign.
Right.
And the last thing you do is build a relationship and then forget who they are if you get elected.
Well, that's what a lot of politicians do.
Well, but this is how you start that act of accountability. I don't know if you saw anything, and I'll share this with you afterward. And you're welcome to use this information in your website and your Skype and other activity. But I confronted Ami Bera directly at one of his town halls. I sent a letter to his campaign. I said, look, in 2010, you wanted 5 debates with the incumbent, Dan Lundgren. And I think there was only one debate between them at that time. You asked for this. I've asked for the same thing. And I went up to the front of the town hall after it was done, and I said, Ami Bera, and there was a table between us. I said, look, I'm here. You're right across the table. Between two gentlemen, a gentleman's agreement, 3 debates. Let's let people make a comparison between you and me. And I looked right at him. And he gave me some answer about I need to do my own town halls, and he made no commitment. But that's, to me, that's an unfair process for the people of this community to see who can best represent them. And I'll be responsible, not as the incumbent, to make those comparisons. That's my job, right? My job as the challenger is to share, here's the status quo, and I think something different should happen. Right. But the fact that I looked right into his eyes and I said, between you and me, 2 gentlemen, civil, I was very civil, very respectful, but very clear, there needs to be more than 1 debate, if we can debate at all. I say at least 3. I think that's a fair compromise. You asked for 5, I asked for 5, let's do 3. And he didn't respond. And so I just think that's another lack of accountability from the person that's representing me in Washington, D.C., and I see that as clearly wrong.
Right, and coming at it from this angle, you're also, you're obviously a fair contender here in this race and well qualified for the job. You're a patriot, you love this country. You're also a constituent of his. What does this say to the other people who are constituents who then want to address him and have questions? He just chooses not to answer you? I mean, it's really, really poor sportsmanship. It's just not right. But I've seen this. I've interviewed another individual today who's facing the same situation as you are, with the incumbent not wanting to debate. It's not uncommon, unfortunately. And it's a complete disservice to the American people and to Californians who are your potential constituents. So now, what is your message to those people who have the opportunity to vote for you? What do you want them to know about you?
So one of the most important messages is that I am a Marine. It's part of my DNA. I chose the Marine Corps and earned those stripes. And so there is a bit about me that is fighter. I want to fight for our community. Look, when you're in Washington, D.C., and there's opportunities for jobs and there's policies that impact what happens to your community, if you're not fighting against people who want to take those from you, and it doesn't matter, quite frankly, party or otherwise back there, if you're not out there hooking and jabbing for your community, you're going to lose. You're going to be on the bitter end of a decision that impacts in a negative way the people that you represent. Right. And so I know there's been cases, one of them being Aerojet, which is a large company that was here, that moved to Alabama because they were offered a better deal. And my representative didn't show up. And a lot of that activity happened in Washington, D.C. I don't blame Aerojet. I don't blame members representing Alabama.
How can you blame them?
No, I don't blame them at all.
They made a smart deal for their people.
One of the clear, principled things that they'll always get from me is I will fight for this community. They'll know it, and I'll be very transparent about that. The other thing, too, is I understand the burden of being in California. It's a unique burden to the United States. Mm-hmm. We have the highest, most expensive tax on our gases, the highest taxes. We have the worst business climate. It takes 7 years for a new development to see a return on their investment in our community. The last thing that I would do is go back to Washington, D.C. and double down on the costs of people just trying to make it here. We have a severe, and you know this very well, a severe case of those who have and those who don't have in California, and it's getting worse every day. You have to make phone calls and reach out to people all the time if you're running for office. And I would say a large portion, upwards of around 10%, so 1 out of every 10 people I speak to is actually either moved away or has interests in another state, and they're not coming back. And some of them want to, but they can't because they have a business and they're stuck here, but they would love to leave. It happens all the time to me.
I spoke, and this is a great point, I spoke with a gal who Texas is offering her a really great deal to move her booming company there.
Sure.
Different kinds of tax breaks, land breaks, property, all sorts of startup, incentives and other things to get her to the point where she'll move. She agreed to move.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't she?
So,
Texas,
and Texas
how
is
do
a
we
perfect
keep,
example.
Texas,
as you know, Erin, they are privatizing their own rail system that will be more modern and actually be between the large metropolises in Texas, self-funded, completely privately funded. What do we have? A $120 billion boondoggle down in the Central Valley. And as anyone expects, if you're following these midterm elections, absolutely the Democrats would like to win the election and then would like to pay for this train using federal taxpayer dollars with state taxpayer dollars. Let me be clear, that is a statement already made. Understand that's what's going to happen if this election is lost. And that's a perfect
they're tax
example.
and spend all the way to the bank and back.
Yep.
And back again and back and forth they go. They don't have a problem making projects and spending other people's money, unfortunately. And so that's why it's great to hear exactly what you just had to say, which is we need real solutions. A hot topic, and I know I ask everybody this, but I want to know your position on national security issue, the border situation, and how it ties into immigration. Where do you stand on funding and building the wall?
So to me, whatever's most efficient and effective down on our border, I think is the best solution. I've actually worked in counter-border operations in the military. There were programs that allowed us to do that before the Secretary of Defense at the time decided to stop those programs. And in some cases, technology and people were better than wall. But in other cases, the wall was the right solution. So I don't have to get mixed up in terms of whether we simply need a wall or otherwise. We need to do what's most effective to secure our borders, period. And the other thing, too, people don't understand, especially people who are from the left, they say, oh, you know, you're going to harm people trying to cross our border who are just trying to improve their lives. You're actually saving lives. It is a human right condition that you are improving by closing that border, because many of those people are abused by coyotes. They're abused by other people who are trying to get across. They lose all their money. There's all sorts of things that happen along that border that are dangerous to even the people who are trying to make a difference to come here for themselves or their families. And so absolutely, I think, along with, of course, national security threats that can come through those border, there's other more day-to-day or practical reasons for why we need to secure that border without a doubt.
Right. So I look at it as, infrastructure, technology, manpower, a very comprehensive solution. Messaging is important with people too. I think that the progressive left has tried to alienate and divide people. This is one of the issues where they've been highly successful using heartstrings as opposed to finding practical and real solutions for the people. And like you mentioned about the human trafficking, the humanitarian issue is huge. I mean, aside from the guns, the drugs, and the other issues that are involved, the humanitarian side, I believe it will detour a lot of issues relating to that area if you do a comprehensive solution, not just the wall, not just manpower, not just technology. And we have to enforce here within the United States, obviously, as well. And so it's good to hear that you have a balanced viewpoint. And I believe that'll help you unite your constituents, because the left is doing so much harm. You know, how is the response from your constituents on this issue? Are they polarized? Do you find yourself trying to bring them together and unite them? I mean, what are you experiencing when you attack that issue with somebody?
Well, there's a lot of very convenient low-hanging fruit for them to feel like they have an understanding of the issue, and so you have to get past that. You have to unpack the issue a little bit and explain to them. I'll give you an example. The question around asylum. A lot of them say, oh, the asylum issue, it's so terrible that people who are coming here just to help themselves or their family, can't find a way to become either citizens or just to live in our community. And my response to them is, well, why don't you actually look at the cases and think about this a little bit? So there's a domestic abuse case in Latin America somewhere. So domestic abuse case, it's not a good thing, but is it something the U.S. needs to respond to here in the United States to a domestic abuse case in this Latin American country? But the message gets out that if you have a domestic abuse case, then why not just go to America? They're going to take care of it because the asylum procedures allow to be included domestic abuse cases. And that message gets out to thousands of people. And so now we're actually doing judicial reform for Latin American country X because people are leaving their own country to come to the United States to receive what they feel is a more fair system and treated more fairly. Of course they're treated more fairly. This is America, but we can't be everybody's judicial system. And so that, when you start to explain it in those terms, and then people realize, so you mean we're actually taking care of legal domestic abuse cases from other countries all across places like the Latin America or other places? Yes. Okay, now I understand. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that for all these countries. No, maybe we should be leveraging, which we already do, some of the aid that we provide to these countries along with aid that comes from other countries to improve the judicial system within those countries so they become more democratic. There's a stronger judicial system. We already do that. We already have money, as you well know, going to every country in the world supporting various causes. And so let's emphasize that we're already doing this work to try to improve what's happening in those countries versus bring all of those challenges to our own judicial system, which is already impacted and we're already dealing
overburdened. It's overburdened.
Overburdened.
Right.
You know, as a footnote, Erin, 1 out of every 3 federal prisoner came here illegally. Each of them cost $33,000 on average across the United States for most states. Here, of course, it's about $90,000 because in California, it costs a lot more to do everything.
It's huge.
But the fact is, 1 out of every 3 federal prisoners came here illegally. So we are taking the burden of criminality as well as justice reform into our country and trying to fix the world's problems. And we can't do that for everyone.
Well, you know, that's a great point you're making. That's a great point you're making. Because one of the things I always have brought up with individuals, and I like to hear your perspective because it really brings some clarity. But I bring up is that, look, if people won't fight for their own country, if they won't work to reform their own nation, to better their own communities, what makes us think that they're going to do anything for the United States of America once they get here? And at that very basic level, it gets people to think, because it's not about, you know, I welcome legal immigrants. My family came here from Austria fleeing the Holocaust. So, you know, obviously there's I think a natural space where we want to help people. We're not insensitive, and we don't lack compassion. It's just a matter of function. Can we police all of these other countries? We shouldn't be nation building. Where do you stand on nation building?
So
we'll go right into that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, let me just kind of reinforce a point you're saying, which is we accept more immigrants than any other nation in the world, and we will continue to do that. We provide more foreign aid than the next, within the legal limits, we provide more foreign aid than the next 22 countries in the world. So the fact is that we're doing more to help this world than any other place. My view about nation building is that I do have a serious concern if we're not involved in what happens around the world, that we could find ourselves on someone else's agenda. We have to be cautious about that, because there are very strong countries that are focusing their monies, their resources into things that will limit our ability to be free and to operate off of a more democratic global universe than what we have right now. Everyone seems to forget that China is a communist country. Like, you don't hear that very often.
They look a little bit more capitalist these days, but I hear they have spies riding in Senator Dianne Feinstein's car, so you never know. But no, I mean, they are a communist country.
They are a communist country, and go and try to sell something there or produce something there. They make you give the entire blueprint for what you're trying to produce so they can replicate it soon. So my point to that is, absolutely, we have to be involved globally. But does this mean that we have to build out every nation? Oh, and when we provide things like foreign aid to a country like Egypt, which we provide a tremendous amount of foreign aid to Egypt, and then we learn that they accept weapons from North Korea as a proliferation sale, don't we actually threaten to not give them foreign aid if they're not doing things that benefit both their community as threatening us
being
with
good
aid
neighbors?
A country that we don't like? Yeah, so look, I think we have to be fair and balanced in how we approach our global responsibilities, but boy, we'd like to see other countries step up and help us to do this hard work as well.
Right, partnerships, yes, absolutely. And I, thank you for communicating that. That's really vital information. One thing I've noticed with President Donald Trump is he's started all these great conversations, and unfortunately, a lot of the people in Congress, many of them, don't back up the people of the United States of America, which are relying on his leadership as well as theirs to stay safe, so to speak.
Yep.
And he's doing good, hard work. Where do you stand on some of these issues that he's facing in terms of like the trade agreements? I know that you're not running for the U.S. Senate, but, as a House of Representatives person, you're going to have a large impact on a lot of different things, budgetary-wise, and where do you stand on those issues?
So I'll give you a couple of examples, because I was also at the U.S. Department of State representing the U.S. Around the world for nonproliferation issues. And so I've been in those situations where you go and have important but difficult meetings, like he had with Canada or the G7 when they hosted the summit. And I think he felt like he was actually making breakthroughs. There was a lot of pushback because he was going out with a different agenda. Yeah, there's always pushback. He should be representing his country. And when you're representing your country and they're representing their countries, there's conflict. It's important conflict. But someone's out there representing us. But then at the end of it, Trudeau expects him to sign this communique or this final message that says, you know, it was kumbaya and things were perfect and we're all working together. No, that message needs to be a reflection of what actually happened. And I think that's what actually happened in that case, where President Trump said, wait a minute, this isn't what happened at this summit. There's disagreement, and we're leaving with disagreement, looking to improve where we can agree and work together in the future. But I'm not going to step back and not represent Americans in these summits and other things that I do globally.
Right.
And so I think that's a perfect example to where they were surprised by the idea that a president of the United States would say America first and the American citizens who hired me to do my job. And I want that reflected in this communique. Right. That's a great example where he's doing business differently that a lot of people, of course, in Washington institutionally, they're completely shocked by, which I think they need the shock.
They need the shock value, quite frankly, and the media needs the shock value. Everybody needs the shock value.
He's being completely honest.
And the reality is we need people to advocate for us. That's what Congress is supposed to be doing, working for their constituents, legislating according, and then the president is supposed to, you know. So I fully support him in the very difficult conversations he's been having. But it's good to hear that you have a very good perspective of that too, because going forward, I can't see as the presidential election starts heating up, it getting any easier. And as you go up for election here in November and potentially head to DC, that's a lot of hard work ahead of you to help not burn bridges, build them, because so many people have just been breaking them down all across the way as often as they can. And, hearing that you're prepared for that, it's good news. Because this is going to be a lot of hard work. What you're describing is a lot of the institution cracking because it knows that change is afoot. And institutions and bureaucracies and governments, by nature don't like to change. Look, I worked for 3 national level agencies, and all 3 of them hated change. The moment that we decided to have a Homeland Security Department, organizations like the FBI and others who do great work, I'm not suggesting otherwise, for the most part do this great work for our country, they all hated the idea that someone else was going to take a piece of their pie. And so change is always difficult. I had Sean Spicer was out. Government breeds more government, which breeds more government. Government breeds more government.
Right. And they would love to make decisions for you. I told people yesterday in a conversation I was having, look, if you want to just give up all of your decision-making to the federal government, they'll gladly take that opportunity and they'll take money to produce the program to make that decision for you. That's just its nature. We learned that from Ronald Reagan, but we learned that by way of example many, many times. And so what's happening with President Trump out there is he's breaking glass, and he's saying institutionally for a long, long time, going back to why I'm running, a lot of people were being passed up. Washington wasn't caring about Americans. And I'm here because I care about Americans, and it's going to take institutional change. And that's what I support.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Less tax, less regulation, less government. Reduced size and scope of government is important.
And more freedom.
More freedom. Lots more freedom and exercising of liberties, obviously. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the Erin Cruz Show. Can we just do a quick recap? You give your name, a little bit about why you're running, and then your website information where people can
you bet.
Time, talent, treasure. People want to get involved.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Andrew Grant, and I'm running for District 7 for the U.S. House of Representatives in California. I'm a born and bred Californian, went to the Naval Academy, served in the Marine Corps, in combat, served in other areas, owned a small business in California. All of those things and those experiences have really shaped me to decide to run for office and represent Americans, represent this great community. What's important to me, I am conservative, so those principles are very valuable to me. It means less government in our lives, people being able to make decisions for themselves. I trust Americans, and that's why I am Republican and why I am conservative, because here we need to be able to see opportunities just like other places across the U.S. And I feel like the burden of living in California has become too much for people. they feel like the person representing us in Washington, D.C. is not being held to account for his efforts to make things easier to allow more freedoms to occur within our community. So that's why I'm running. My website is andrewgrantforcongress.com. Come and visit us on the website and support us if you can. Volunteer, contribute, you name it. We can use all the help we can get. It's a tough race, but it's winnable.
Yes, it is a tough race, and we're very glad you're in for the fight. We would love to see your challenger have a conversation with you. Even a town hall, that would be really wonderful. Not even a heated debate. We just need to talk about the issues and hear where he stands and decide on who's best for your community to have serving over there in Washington, D.C. Well, thank you again for being on the Erin Cruz Show, Andrew. Really appreciate
Thank you very much.
it, and God bless you, and take care.
Thank you very much.
To hear more and to learn more on how you can make an impact or about the Erin Cruz Show, visit us online at erincruz.com. That's ERINCRUZ.com.